So as you can see, before we get any tracing allegations, I have sketches for these. I did them originally in another uh, canvas because I was just sort of messing around, planning out things, and then I actually liked how some of the sketches turned out, so I collaged them together and I put one of the trainer outfits that I enjoyed, and I'm using that as my under sketch essentially. So just to clear that up as to why we already have a whole image put behind the thing. Anyway, it is my best friend's birthday coming up, and I care about them a lot, and I was thinking that I wanted to do something kind of fun. And I've been Pavlov dogged into thinking about Pokemon. Apparently, around now is when Pokemon and the industry behind it tends to put out a new Pokemon game or release some kind of information about whatever Pokemon game they will be making. And we haven't really gotten that this year. So it makes sense that I'm thinking about it though, because my brain thinks that it's time for Pokemon. But anyway, I've had Pokemon on the brain, and my best friend really likes Pokemon too. So I messaged them the other day and I asked them, hey, what would your ideal team be if you could have Pokemon in real life? And I want to specify that this is in real life. This isn't like you in the game. Because in the game, we're really focused on winning, right? Oftentimes we're trying to think about type coverage and which Pokemon have the best abilities in battle, things of that nature. So you're not going to find a lot of people putting, I don't know, Bonsly on their ideal team. But in real life, I think that a lot of people might choose a few Pokemon that aren't necessarily battle ready, but are just fun, or they're really cute, or they have a strong nostalgia value. So I wanted to specify that. The other limitation on this is that you can only have one legendary Pokemon, which is why my best friend chose Lunala. So they sent me first they said, give me a second. And then 2 days later, they sent me a roster of their Pokemon. And I'm using the forms that they sent me on their roster rather than doing like mega evolutions. I don't know if any of these have mega evolutions actually. I didn't pay attention to that very much in whatever generation they introduced those. But I took that and then I drew them as a trainer, and I chose the trainer outfit that looked more Pokemon-esque rather than the one that maybe was a direct outfit that they wore. And I put them all together and I put them into Clip Studio and I drew them and I printed it out so that I can give it to them for their birthday. But I thought this was a really cute idea, and I would love it if someone drew me with my Pokemon team. I'm probably just going to do it myself. Maybe I'll record that one as well. I know my brother wants one of his ideal Pokemon team. He has already sent me the list of his ideal Pokemon team, so I might just do this for people I care about. Because I feel like a lot of people around my age or who are a little older than me have a strong association with Pokemon. It was one of our first games that we played. I didn't want the background to be too complex here because I really... There's so much going on with Pokemon already. There are already so many shapes and colors and all of that. So I wanted the background to kind of let the Pokemon shine. And you can see that in Pokemon games too. They tend to have more simplistic backgrounds, especially in like the battle animations, to let the Pokemon designs themselves shine. Speaking of realizations that I had when I was drawing this, I think and I discussed this with my brother, I feel like there are different tiers of furry, you know? And this is no judgment of furries. If you haven't seen my previous video, I am very much like, I don't give a shit what you like in the most positive way possible. Like, you do you. And also, it can be kind of fun to draw humanoid animals. Like, I don't know, it's like drawing monsters to me. Anyway, I was looking at Incineroar, which is that little cat guy on the far right, the fire cat. And I was thinking, this is a tier of furry. But then you have, I feel like what the wider community is like acceptable furry, and this is from the judgmental perspective, where you have like for people who are familiar with Fire Emblem, the Lagoos, or, a girl with just cat ears, or my brother gave an example, Anki from League of Legends, I think. It's like a nine-tailed fox. Because they're primarily human, I feel like people consider that more acceptable. And then you go into another tier and you've got like your Beastars and your Zootopia, where they're animals, but they're wearing human clothes and they have human mannerisms. So it almost toes this weird line. And it's like a tier above the human with animal traits. It's an animal with human traits. And then you go another tier and you have like the Incineroar, where it's just very fursuit animal, right? There's not a lot of human traits. It's not wearing clothes. It just makes noises. So I feel like they're definitely different tiers. And I think that's something that needs to be investigated more and talked about. But I feel like people just don't want to touch the furry community because they don't want to be called a furry online, because now it's become like the new age weeaboo term. I don't know. I feel like anime's become more accepted. But also at the same time, I feel like we're going through a regression of that. Like we peaked in pandemic when everyone decided to go through their alternative goth anime phase and just express themselves. And now we're back to making fun of people for expressing themselves because we went out into the world again and realized that we can judge people. That's just something I've been noticing. To talk about the piece a bit more, I'm just doing really what is becoming more of my standard process with all of this. So have a basic sketch and background. I didn't plan it out as much as like my full-on illustrations with color schemes and grayscaling and all of that. But I had a basic idea, and then I'm just going through flatting my inking, flatting my colors, and I use a multiply layer to establish basic shadows, and then I use a soft light layer to establish basic lighting, and then I go in and I render on top of those layers. So then I'll go in with like a coloring brush or a blending brush of some sort. I don't remember what brush I was using here. I renamed all my brushes, so you can't really trust the name that I have on there. I can find them in my downloads if anyone's interested. But I go through and I just sort of add a painterly effect because that's what my actual education is in. And paint over some of my lines too to kind of give it a bit more depth. And then do some final color adjustments. So right now we're in the painting section of it, which is probably the longest second to sketching / refining the sketch. I kind of struggled with the fire belt of the Incineroar, which you'll see later on, figuring out the best way to really make it look luminescent. Fire's difficult. Like fire, water, very elemental things can be really difficult to depict in a realistic fashion. Smoke is another one, because things tend to get muddy with those things. And I think that they interact with the environment so much that you have to be very aware of the environment when you're working through it. Also, let me just say, after sketching all of these characters and drawing all of them, Lunala, fucking bitch to draw. So many shapes, so many big shapes. I know it's basically just a bat, and I like bats. I've drawn bats before, but something about it was like, just, I don't know. I feel like maybe also the big curves. I'm not good at drawing big curves, which is why you can see that a lot of my drawings wind up having more angles in them. They're a bit angular because it's easier to draw that than to try and draw a precious straight curve. Also, I kind of tend to like the way it looks better. I'm more of an angle gal than a curvy soft art person. I'm using some gouache brushes for the background, which was really fun. It added a nice texture that I feel like was a bit lost in the Pokemon since I used just a really basic non-textural blending brush. So I wanted to incorporate some amount of grain and brush line marks. What are those called? Brush marks? Is it just called brush marks and I'm being a dumbass? I have a BFA in painting. We didn't really do digital painting, although we started to shift over and it became more of an acceptable medium around my junior or senior year. A lot of the instructors started to do it as well, especially during the pandemic. That was another thing. During the pandemic, because we were limited on our resources, digital media became a lot more acceptable within the fine arts community. And I want that to continue. That's the thing. I want that to stay alive. I want to see more digital artists in museums because I feel like that's become the new printmaking. I don't know if people know the history of printmaking, but it was for the longest time never allowed in museums and still kind of struggles to be accepted into fine art spaces because it's seen as almost a blue collar type of art. It's seen as an advertisement. It's seen as making posters. It's not seen as fine art, whatever the fuck that means. But they were not allowed into museums for the longest time. And so they have just recently started to be able to get in and not be considered just a commercial art. And I feel like digital art has become the new printmaking, where it is very much used and frequented and respected by certain communities, but fine artists do not consider it legitimate art. And you see that discourse online a lot too. And you also see general populace thinking that as well. So I really hope that we get to a day where, it's accepted into museums and we see it as a genuine medium. But this is the final piece. I hope that you liked it.